Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I simplify the web, and in this video I'll be simplifying the concept of box models in CSS. And I'll be using these two yellow blocks, this small web project I created. I'll be using this to explain what the CSS model is, and I have the code for it which I'll walk you through in a bit. But before doing this, let me first define what a box model is in CSS. All elements in the DOM have a box model. Box model of an element is a box that contains the element. It specifies how much space an element occupies. So even if an element may be 200 pixels, it may be occupying as much as 400 pixels on the DOM. And this space is usually determined by the margins, the borders, the paddings, and the content of that element. What are paddings? Padding is the space between the border of the element and the content of the element. Margin is the space outside the border of the element. Border itself is the area around the content at the padding. Content of the element can be image, it can be text, it can be anything. This is an illustration to explain what I mean. So here you can see a div with a class of container and it has the content text. And you can see the container class has a padding of 200 pixels, a border of 80 pixels, and a margin of 80 pixels. And you can see the box here. The content box itself has maybe 100 pixels width and maybe 50 pixels height, but that is not the space it occupies on the DOM. It has a padding of 200 pixels, which you can see is between the border and the content. It has a border of 80 pixels, which you can see is outside the padding and the content, and it has a margin of 80 pixels, which you can see is the space outside the border. So you can see that even if the content is 100 pixels wide and 50 pixels high, when you add the padding, when you add the border, when you add the margin, all of these things that make up the CSS model, you'd see that this element would be occupying as much as 400 pixels by 400 pixels space on the DOM. Now let's come back to this example so that you can see how this box model works practically. I'll walk you through the code of it. So you can see this is a div with a class of container. Let me zoom in a bit. And this has a div class of box1 and a div class of box2. And this is the CSS for it. The container has a margin of 20 pixels. And you can see 20 pixels is from the edge of the body element. It has a width of 300 pixels and it has a border of 1 pixel solid red, which is this you can see here. I just created that so you can really see where the container is. And I applied a margin of 0 on the p tags because by default p tags have margins. Box 1 and box 2 have a border of 10 pixels solid blue, width 150 pixels, height 150 pixels, and background color of yellow, which you can see. Now box 1 has a padding top of 40 pixels, and if you remember what I said, padding is the space between the border of the element and the content of the element. So with a padding top of 40 pixels, you can see from this border to this content is 40 pixels. And box 1 also has a margin button of 40 pixels, and I can explain with margin. Margin is the space outside the border of the element. So you can see the space between this here margin, which is the bottom, and here is 40 pixels. And box 2 here has a margin left of 40 pixels, and like I explained with margins, margins are the space outside the element's border. So you can see this is the element's border, and then from here to here, which is the container, is 40 pixels. And box 2 also has a padding left of 40 pixels, and like I explained with paddings, paddings are the space between the border and the content. Since the content is this box 2 here, you can see here is 40 pixels. So like I explained earlier, CSS box model defines how much space an element occupies on the DOM, and this space is determined by the border, this blue border, is determined by the margins, which is outside the border, is also determined by the padding, which is inside the border, between the border and the element, and also by the content itself. So for example, box 1 will be occupying the whole of this down to here on the DOM. If you found this video very helpful, kindly like, subscribe for more web content, and also share with others.